Welcome, everyone. We are grateful that thou hast lended thy ear to the Round Table podcast. The Knights of the Round Table intend to discuss modern issues through the eternal wisdom of the Bible and encourage others in these uncertain times. Consider following us and sharing the podcast with as many brothers in Christ as possible, and most importantly, enjoy thyselves.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Round Table Podcast. Today, we have a very special guest, Garret, who is going to answer some questions for us about the Church of Christ denomination.
Hello, everybody.
So, I think we can go ahead and start off with. I guess, what are like the most notable type of differentiations when it comes to the Church of Christ versus Protestant denominations?
Well, I would say the most notable would be our lack of the musical instruments in worship. We don't use choirs. We don't really use like one person. I've visited different churches, and sometimes you see like one person stand up and sing a song by themselves. We don't do that. We when we're gonna sing a song or a hymn, the entire congregation joins in. So that would probably be different to someone. Sorry, go ahead.
No. Keep going.
Oh, I said that would probably be different to someone who's not, used to that. The entire congregation being the choir.
Yeah, I mean, I come from a Baptist background, so I used to go to a Baptist church, and at least for us, it was you had, of course, a set choir, and of course, everybody too would join in the singing. But like you said, you don't have any choir, and it's just solely on the congregation. So how is that,
Correct.
directed? Who picks the songs and stuff like that?
Well, we usually do appoint a song leader, but it's not that's not a set position. That's just open to anyone who wishes to lead a song for the services.
Okay, interesting.
And we usually use songbooks or the overhead projector. Sometimes they put it on screens. Depends on which congregation one visits.
Right. So, like, as far as other than just the way you worship, are there any like uh, doctrinal or theological differences between you that separates you from other Protestants?
Well, we do take the Lord's Supper every Sunday morning service. It's a weekly communion for us, and that's something that others, I'm not sure if they do that. As far as doctrinal, um, we're kind of closer to. I mean, I guess being down south, we're mainly around, a Baptist population is the majority, and for baptism is a big topic, I guess you could say, because of course, as you're familiar with, Baptists believe that you're saved and then you're baptized. It's to a Baptist, it's a profession of faith. Well, I guess we're sometimes I think unfairly, we do believe that baptism is necessary and that baptism is the door to the church. So we do. I guess you could say we're more in. I'm sorry, I'm trying to think a good way to say this. I guess in doctrinal views concerning only baptism, we're more in line with we believe like in baptismal regeneration, and that it is for the remission of sins.
Okay.
If that makes
All
sense
right.
to you.
That makes of course. Uh, oh, a lot of like you said, me being Baptist and the regular Baptist view is that you get saved at this magical point in time that you can't really know for certain. But when the Holy Spirit reaches out and you actually choose to make that decision, then you make the decision to get baptized. And yeah, I would actually personal views. I would actually have to agree. It depends. Baptism is one of those things where it's so important to Christianity because it's just one of the main things that was originally done and that continues to be done. But
Mhm.
it's one of the things that I haven't really done much research in accordance to the Bible. So my actual views limited because my knowledge is limited. But I would have to agree with a lot of the stuff that you would say about baptism, basically holding baptism in a higher regard that it actually does uh, essentially save
Yeah.
you. But I still do
Well, I
believe
mean,
in the whole
yeah, I mean, Peter. Peter. I wish I could pull up the verse right now, but I'm not in a place where I can. And Peter. Let's see. I think it was. Is it
which
First
verse?
Peter? When he's comparing. I can kind of quote it. Jesus went to preach to the spirits in prison and talking about the ark, and this corresponds to baptism. And he does use the words "which now saves you." Depending on the translation, of course, it does differ from each other. You want me to find it?
Oh,
The
sure.
verse?
Go ahead.
I can.
Uh,
Let me. Okay, 1 second.
sure. Not exactly where in First Peter that is, so it's going to be hard for me to find it too.
First Peter, chapter 3, verse 21.
All right. First Peter chapter 3, verse 20. All right. Let's see. All right. So this is what it says in my translation in the New King James. There is also an antitype which now saves us, baptism, not the removal of the filth of our flesh, but the answer of a good conscience towards God. The resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven, is at the right hand of God, angels and authorities and powers having been made subject to him. Did I read the
Hmm.
wrong verse?
Hold.
Oh, I read an extra verse. Never mind. Here, I'm going to compare this in different versions to see if there's any differences in wordage. Let's see. See. New Living Translation, it says, "And that water is a picture of baptism, which now saves you, not by removing dirt from your body, but as a response to God from a clean conscience. Effective because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ." I do like the way that one words it. It kind of simplifies it a lot more.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah,
I mean that's what baptism is. It's a appeal to God. And the answer of a good conscience.
it says it right here in the Bible.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah. As far as
You'd be.
I think
Go ahead.
you can go ahead.
I would say you would be surprised with if just point that out. Some people are like, I've never heard that before, and it kind of surprises me because I don't know how they wouldn't. But I guess some churches do. I guess they kind of tend to shy away from the verses that may, uh, I mean, I wouldn't say directly, but it comes with a little question there. I guess you could say. Well,
Yeah.
if the ark is being symbolized, I mean, if baptism is being symbolized like the ark, and it says, "Doth now save us" or "save you," depending on the translation, how can we say baptism does not save you if Peter says it does?
Yeah.
So anyway, but yeah,
Uh, I mean, I definitely am interested, maybe in another podcast episode, like baptism being one of the main subjects, and us going over, everything in the Bible that mentions or has something to relate to baptism, and kind of just doing one overarching thing, just talking about that. But yeah, that is interesting, and it makes sense. I can't blame y'all for or blame the Church of Christ for believing in that specifically, and it makes a strong case. Like I said, I have yet to really examine it more, but I will definitely do that. Uh,
yeah,
so
and
other than your views, go ahead.
sorry, my bad. I was gonna say, I have a lot of Baptist friends, and just because we disagree, on a few things, that doesn't mean, we have to not like each other or anything, you know. Um, I would say we do hold baptism definitely in a higher regard than I believe the Baptist church does overall. And I've heard it said, one of the arguments, I guess you could say, is like, well, one of the Baptist arguments is, well, what if someone was on their way to the baptistry and they died? Would, according to you, they be saved or not? And that's a good question, but that's kind of, I don't know if that's realistic. First of all, I'm not the judge, of someone's soul. I think
Yeah,
God is merciful enough to allow that and be okay. You can only do what you can do. If you're like dying and you can't be, I do not believe that disqualifies you. But I do
yeah.
believe
Yeah, at the
that
end of the day,
if you're alive and you're able, I would be headed to it. That's my
yeah,
personal opinion.
yeah, yeah. It makes sense. If you are, you know, in Baptists, like you said, they'll hold baptism to a slightly I wouldn't say. Well, it's a different type of view on it, definitely. But at least the most of the Baptists that I know would agree that baptism is very important, and so if you even though it's more symbolic for us and less literal, uh,
Mhm.
if you are if you actually want to make the commitment to become a Christian and have and submit before God and Jesus Christ, then you should do it. Uh, I've never heard it
Mhm.
said ever that when somebody chooses to be a Christian and somebody says, "Oh, you don't need to be baptized." I mean, at least in the environment that I have been, there has been a lot of the Baptists and Church of Christ and just all these different Christians, and I think, or at
Yeah.
least down where I live, the overall view is if you are alive and and kicking and you want to give your life to the Lord, then go get baptized. That's usually one of the first steps, if not the first step. So yeah, I would definitely have to agree with you. You should do it. You should always do it. It's never there's never not a good reason, at least, and at most it's very important to the Christian faith. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And and I know
Far
most Baptist churches may not do this. I don't know. I'm not, but I know some at least do. Some, like the members who are willing to be baptized, they usually wait until they have a large number list, and then they baptize them in a group. We do the exact opposite of that. When someone confesses their belief in Jesus Christ and they want to be baptized, we do it immediately, like on the spot, if possible.
Yeah,
why wait?
yeah, I definitely agree with that. That's a good view to have. I definitely agree that I know some Baptist churches around here, or just a lot of churches actually in general. Not really depending on denomination, uh, but they tend to like you said, kind of group them up that way. They can make one big ceremony out of it, and get it all done at once rather than it all the time. And so
Yes,
something that I do not agree with, and like you said, I think we agree on this where if you want to get baptized, then you should get baptized instantly. There's been some times in some
yes,
churches that I've been to where it is like that, where you get baptized immediately. And I am currently attending a non-denominational church for various reasons, but I wouldn't consider myself a non-denominational. But at least the church that I go to, great pastor, great teaching, doctrinal teaching, and one of the things that we did recently, that we had this period of several months where every single week we had place to baptize people, and that way, as soon as you make that decision, we can do it right there in front of the whole church. And I really like that when they did do that. But I definitely agree that that should be like a constant thing.
yes. I do too. I believe if one is willing to come into the faith, they shouldn't be told they have to wait for a few weeks. I mean, you know, it's. I think that's the complete opposite of what Christ would have wanted.
I mean, if you think about it, that could also reflect certain churches more less thinking of you as an individual and more as, oh, a person that you know, that's about to get saved. Like another number in the church, and less about, okay, there's
Yeah,
a personal person that wants to give their life to Jesus.
yeah. And another, I hate to, keep going, but, another thing I do personally strongly disagree with is most Baptist church, they have to vote on you whether you even can be baptized, even after you confess and want to be baptized. You have to be voted in. And we do not do that. We do not hold any votes. You want to be baptized? We are baptizing you into the church. We don't vote. Jesus Christ holds the vote.
Yeah, amen to that. I can't speak for every Baptist church, but at least mine that I did attend, um, in the way Baptist culture that I know is that, or at least at my church, they would do the whole, would do it, come up like somebody would profess their faith, and they're like, okay, we're gonna have this person baptized, and basically the preacher would ask the congregation, you know, I mean, I guess it's different for every church. One pastor might say, do y'all, vote to consent that he will join our church? But I have never personally heard that part, but I have heard more of like, uh, will it's more of like a will you stand by this person they enter into their faith or something like that. I don't know if this is making sense, but
Yeah. Oh, you're
what
fine.
I am used to at the specific church that I went to, it was more of a cultural kind of ceremonial type thing, because nobody would actually, or at least not in my experience, would ever say no to somebody being baptized. But I feel like at least some churches they'll ask anyway, because the whole structure of that church is kind of like need the participation of the congregation and stuff like that.
Yeah. You would hope that would never happen, but what if? What if somebody's like, no? I mean,
I feel
okay.
like that would be very awkward.
It's like,
Just like
how would you even
a member of the
resolve that?
congregation. Exactly.
I
I
mean,
think like that would leave a
people are
pastor
people.
speechless.
I mean, I am, to be honest, being human beings, I'm sure that's happened a lot of times. Just because people hold grudges against others and they shouldn't for
True,
whatever
true.
dumb reason. I mean, but yeah, I mean, what if, I don't know, that did happen? You know, it's like, okay, I'm sorry. You, you can't be a Christian, you know. Is that the answer they would get? It's, I don't know. We don't have that problem, thankfully.
I
We just do it.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's probably a good idea.
So
Oh
somebody could be saying
man,
no.
I
It's
don't
like,
think.
yeah, no, we do it anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Like I have no idea. I think it depends on the situation, and I guess if they are like doing a sincere vote, that you would have to out like the majority would have to say no, they cannot be baptized, and if so, then that's shameful. That's absolutely shameful.
Yeah, and you know where do they get the authority to do that? Even we're 3,000 voted in on Pentecost, and that would take a long time. I mean, they were 3,000 people baptized in one day. I doubt they had time to sit around and talk about it for a while.
Uh huh. So as far as like other stuff about the Church of Christ, mentioned that Church of Christ is usually, or at least in your experience, more down south, as you said.
Yeah, we're. I would say the majority of the conservative churches of Christ are southern the Bible Belt. I mean, we do have congregations pretty much everywhere. I mean, even most of our members are not even in the United States, but Africa, China, just different countries all over. I mean, we have congregations in the north as well of the United States and Canada, a few in Canada. Canada's kind of, they don't have many churches in general. And Europe kind of just spread around.
Well, as far as like the start of the Catholic Church, kind of correct me if I'm wrong, because again, I'm just like researching this for myself, trying to find some good information. But it says, or at least the majority of the sources I see, says that the churches of Christ, kind of originally got started because of the American Restoration movement in the 19th century. Uh, do you know anything about that, or?
Yes, and that's actually a very interesting topic because while yes, the mainstream in North America, Church of Christ, uh, kind of have their roots in the Restoration movement, there were also other Churches of Christ already present in Europe, which is kind of strange when you think. And the European Churches of Christ actually joined in fellowship with the American Churches of Christ.
Interesting.
But most people do think of Alexander Campbell, but he didn't start the Church of Christ. The Church of Christ was around before he was born in Europe. It was just the American Restoration movement that became of what we have today in America. I can find the dates for you. Once, let's see if I can find the earliest thing. You can go ahead. I'm gonna look for it.
Yeah, right here it says that despite being influenced by the Restoration movement, individuals of Church of Christ do not consider themselves as like a new church originating near the beginning of the 19th century. Rather, the whole movement is redesigned to present in modern times the church first established at Pentecost in AD 30. The strength of their conviction rests in the renewal of Christ's original church. That's what this thing says.
Yes. And here, I'll read what I found it. Let's see. The following is an excerpt from an article by Carol Seitz that has been found in a number of bulletins over the last few years. It reads as follows. In the Furness district of Lancashire in northwest England, there existed in 1669, during the reign of Charles II, a group of 8 churches of Christ. Most of them are not now in existence. An old minute book has been found of the year 1669, and it shows that they called themselves by the name Church of Christ. They practiced baptism by immersion, celebrated the Lord's Supper each Lord's Day, and had elders and deacons. There was also a Church of Christ in Donnington, Ireland in 1804, and in Allington, Devonshire in 1735. John Davis, a young preacher in the Fife district of Scotland, was preaching New Testament Christianity. 25 years before, Thomas Campbell, Alexander Campbell's father, was born. So it's interesting how there were churches of Christ before the. Most people think of Alexander Campbell as a founder. At least, I mean, we don't, but other people do, because he is the main voice, or well, he not the main voice. It was also Barton Stone, but he influenced a lot of what would become the Restoration movement. But it is interesting that the Church of Christ actually existed before his father was ever even born.
Interesting.
We don't know. We don't know when the Churches of Christ began. It was before the Protestant Revolution, but we aren't. There's no record. The only record we have is from 1669, which was before the Protestant Revolution, Reformation. I'm sorry, said revolution.
Revolution.
Anyway,
I mean, that's essentially what.
yeah, I mean that's technically right, but yeah, the Protestant Reformation. So it is interesting because no one knows how far back it goes. Anyway,
I would make it. Would make the Church of Christ like one of the first, if not the first, Protestant church.
we have been like titled proto Protestant,
Interesting.
kind of with the Waldensians and, well, yeah, the Waldensians. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. I know. Only the Lord knows.
Amen. Amen. Only the Lord knows. Uh, so as far as when it comes to baptism, you'll have a specific belief, and when it comes to worship, you'll have a specific belief. And of course, your origins are separate than the Protestant Reformation, which is also very interesting. Uh, so other than that, uh, I would assume that y'all wouldn't have, that much, not in common with any other, at least mainline Protestants. Uh, or at least ones that are not heretical.
We have in common with the mainline Protestants only what can be read and seen in the New Testament. We we are very strict on not doing anything that the New Testament does not give us the authority to do, such as, in the Old Testament, they used musical instruments. There's no one that could argue that. But in the New Testament, in worship service, the only command that is given is to sing to each other with spiritual songs and hymns.
Interesting. So,
Therefore,
but
since music, sorry, go ahead.
so basically, you believe because it's not specifically mentioned in the New Testament, therefore means that you are not allowed to, or does it come from a prefer not to because it's not mentioned?
Well, just like a lot of topics, it kind of depends on the person. Um, I would say most would see it as not auth. Probably most would see it as not authorized. We like to have an example, an inference, or a direct command for anything we do, pretty much in church. That is. So we don't include musical instruments just because there is in the New Testament no mention of them. And from a lot of history, um, musical instruments actually wasn't included. I'm gonna find one other thing. 1 second. Yeah, let's see. We actually have the records and quotes of a lot of different, I guess you could say, biblical scholars, Aquinas, Augustine, Firestone, on uh, instrumental music. And it was actually the Catholic Church was the first to bring in the piano.
Really?
Let's see. Yeah, I have some articles. What did early Christians read? Uh, what did early Christians believe about instrumental music before 300 AD? And it lists a lot of their comments and quotes about the topic before 300 AD. I can see. I can send the link later, but then I can just read Augustine, or known to the Catholics, I should say, as Saint Augustine, quoted saying, "Musical instruments were not used. The pipe, tabret, and harp here associate so intimately with the essential heathen cults, as well as with the wild revelries and shameless performances of the degenerate theater and circus. It is easy to understand the prejudices against their use in the worship." Augustine, 354 AD, describing the scene at Alexandria under Anastasius. Chrysostom
It's very interesting.
was quoted. I'll read one more, then I'll be quiet. Was quoted saying, "David formerly sang songs. Also today we sing hymns. He had a lyre with lifeless strings. The church has a lyre with living strings. Our tongues are the strings of the lyre, with a different tone indeed, but much more in accordance with piety. Here, there is no need for the kithara, or for the stretch, or string, or for the plectrum, or for any instrument. But, if you like, you may yourself become a kithara, mortifying the members of the flesh, and making a full harmony of mind and body. For when the flesh no longer lusts against the spirit, but has submitted to its orders, and has been led at length into the best and most admirable path, then will you create a spiritual melody. Chrysostom, 347 AD to 407. Exposition of
Wow.
Psalms 41.
That was
So,
actually kind
yeah.
of beautiful the way you described it.
It's a quote from him. I believe he's also another Catholic saint, interestingly enough. Yeah, I don't remember the date for sure, but the organ, not piano, I get them kind of confused. The organ was the first instrument that was actually introduced into the church by Catholicism, or which would become Catholicism, I guess I should say. And there was a lot of backlash to that. A lot of people had issues with it. But over time, things that were different and not seen as a good light become more accepted and more widely used. And that's pretty much what happened. It became the universal accompaniment. Even the Protestant reformers, um, Spurgeon, John Calvin, Luther, they were highly against. They actually took the organ out. They were
Really?
against instruments. Yes, and but over time, of course, they come back in. So
That's very interesting.
it's not a new view, but it's just, I guess, over time, more people they don't have as much of a problem with it as they used to, and you can't really find a Protestant church nowadays that doesn't use instrumental music. But their founders all had made quotes about how that they would never allow it and different things. It is interesting. Just read what they said, even like Spurgeon and the others I mentioned.
And it seems to me that, according to them, they viewed, of course, a lot of these instruments being used in music as either barbaric or pagan, or at the very least, they were too they were too overused in like the common worldly culture that they wanted to maintain a sense of piety, as he
Yeah.
himself mentioned in his quote. So that seems like the biggest driving factor of this whole not using instruments in praise is piety, is, kind of the purity of your worship, not entangling it up with instruments, which I can respect. I can respect that decision. Um, it would, uh, my personal opinion, uh, I don't really have a preference too much. I'm definitely more traditional when it comes to my worship. I like singing hymns, and stuff like
Mhm.
that. But
Yeah.
I'm not really. I don't have a preference to either not having instruments or having instruments. Uh, but I can definitely understand the Church of Christ view of wanting to keep the worship pure and kind of not jumbling it up with the stuff that could reflect negatively, the culture or the world around it.
Yeah. And sometimes we get kind of being too strict about a lot of things, and maybe it's it's good to be, strict about certain things. God is himself is strict on certain things. And while we would not go out and say that, if you use a musical instrument, like there's no hope for you. We would never. That's not a thing. You know. Uh no.
Yeah.
We see the example in the New Testament, and we see the ancient authors, and we're like, maybe there's a reason. Let's keep them out. And in practicality, the churches I have been to, of other denominations that actually do use instrumental music, there's not much singing going on there. The congregation just, sits there and listens, and it's kind of almost a hindrance to the people singing. At least from my experience, I feel like, you know, sometimes you're better off without than with.
Yeah, I could definitely agree with that. There's been definitely churches that I've gone to, or just specific services where people just didn't sing, or you would have, a handful of people singing, but the rest of the congregation would either, not really put their heart and soul into it, maybe mouth the words, or just straight up not participate at all, which is unfortunate. But that
Yeah,
definitely makes sense because I've definitely been in those type of churches and those type of services, and it is a shame,
it
you
is a
should
shame.
want to, with all your heart, worship God.
Yes.
I guess it, depends on the people.
Yeah. And that is true. It does depend on the people to an extent. But when there's, I don't know, I guess when there's music and instruments playing, it's not the people. Some people I've spoken to, they're like worried they might drown out the guitar and things like that. Shouldn't be a thing.
Shouldn't be a
I
concern at
I would
all.
that shouldn't. That's I don't think if something that's one is using isn't even commanded to be used, and it's causing, you know, people to not sing, I don't think that even needs to continue. I mean, if it's causing that, it just needs to be dropped, I believe. I mean, we
I
want
can respect that. That makes sense.
in yeah. In the Church of Christ, we want the entire congregation to sing as loud as they can and as bad as they can. Because, it doesn't matter how we sound sometimes to God. It's our heart that matters.
Hmm.
Doesn't matter if
Amen.
someone's off
Amen.
tune. It doesn't matter if someone doesn't have, as the secular world would say, the best voice. They still, we want them to sing as
Mhm.
best as not as great as they possibly can. Doesn't matter if it's good to hear all the time. None of that matters. It's the heart that matters. It's the devotion that comes
Absolutely.
from the person that matters. And that's
Absolutely.
why I do agree that I do not believe musical instruments should be used.
I mean, I could definitely see that. I could definitely respect that decision. Uh, yeah. I mean, to be honest, I actually didn't know like this some of the specific reasons. I knew the basic. Church of Christ don't want to use musical instruments for some of these reasons,
Yeah.
but you've definitely given a lot more context to those decisions and helped me
Hmm.
understand that. So thank you.
No, you're welcome anytime. And I could go on and on forever,
Well,
but I'm not going to take up your time
hey, that
about
is no problem.
not not musical instruments, but just other things. We don't have pastors. A lot of people don't know that.
Okay, we need
We
to talk about
have
this. What?
well, so we have our church structure is a little different than Baptists. Baptists have the one. It's usually the one man pastor over the church. Is that right?
Yes, and of course, you would have a council of deacons, which, if you want to look at it from like a Catholic perspective, they're basically like the bishops. The deacons are basically
Aye. Yeah.
co leaders in the church that help make decisions and stuff like that.
Ah, yeah. We have we have a plurality of elders. Then we have the preacher or evangelist would be the title. We have deacons, and then the congregation. Of course, teachers as well.
Yeah,
But the elders are the ones who appoint the preacher, and they are basically, you could say, the bishops. You said the bishops. I mean, elder, bishops, and pastors is used synonymously in the New Testament. And
yeah,
as if you read in the New Testament, there's never a single pastor over one church. It's always a plurality, or there's always
yeah,
multiple being appointed at one time. So we stick to that. So we have
yeah.
multiple instead of one.
Okay. So uh, that actually sounds a lot similar to the way Baptists do it. Like you said, there is a council of elders that appoints the preacher and
Mhm.
also kicks them out if they think he's being heretical, or there's some kind of problem within the church. They reserve their power to
Yes.
completely remove him from the church, uh, completely remove his power. So in that light, the Baptists and the Church of Christ are similar as far as like structure. But I am interested in you mentioned that the Council of Elders in the Church of Christ, it's essentially like there being multiple pastors. Does that mean uh, the elders of the church could also preach the message on any given day?
Yes. Be ready in season, out of season. And we use the qualifications in First Timothy as to how we appoint our elders and deacons, and we follow the qualifications and instructions pretty tightly.
Yeah. I know from my experience, the Baptists do the same. I don't know word for word or exactly which verse, but I do know like some of the major points of when Paul in that letter to Timothy was talking about the structure of how these bishops or leaders or elders or whatever you will call it will be appointed, and one of that is usually like if they're married, then they need to be a
Yeah.
strong, well respected leader of their household, who's always full of integrity and also is
Mhm.
respected by the community, and that the community sees him with integrity. I think there's some
Yes.
other stuff that I forgot, but I think those are the main
Oh,
things. Like you have to have
mm.
integrity in the community and in your family.
Yeah. There's quite a few of the qualifications. A few other. I don't know them all by heart. Apt to teach. You know, honest, good
Yeah,
conduct, blameless in the community, as in he doesn't
yeah,
have something that he's done, that's haunting him. Um,
yeah,
as you said, uh, married to one wife, because during that time period they did have polygamy going on, and polygamists were not allowed to be appointed to elders or deacons during that time.
yeah.
and
which is not.
also faithful
I mean,
children. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I'm sorry. There's like thought. I think there's a bit of a gap, probably because we're like in different time zones, to where there's a bit of a delay between us speaking. So sometimes I
Probably.
try to fill the gap, but it's not that much of a gap. Anyway, but yeah, continue.
And well, I was saying the last one I mentioned is their children must also be faithful. And it even states because if they cannot rule their own household, how would they rule the house of God? And it makes sense.
You can't read.
I mean,
Yeah, it makes sense.
if you can't rule your own house, then how should you be in charge of an official position in the house of God?
And even from a more practical standpoint, the fact that if you can't get your kids to behave and be a good example to them, or discipline them or what have you, if you can't be a good father, then how can you expect to be a good advisor of other people that might need your counseling or help?
Correct. So yeah, I think we do follow the qualifications a little stricter than the Baptist Church does. I mean, I know there are some Baptist pastors that don't have children that I've actually encountered, and I always thought that was a little interesting. And some may not even be married, and I was like, wow, okay, because to me, I guess growing up, knowing that our elders and deacons, they have to be married and they have to have children that are faithful to be in that position. So it's always a little different for me. Anyway, go ahead.
That definitely makes sense. I would definitely have to agree with that. Uh, well, this is a lot of great information, but I think we're running out of time. And sorry to cut it short, but this has been really great, and I thank you for coming out on this podcast and kind of talking about your denomination and your beliefs and stuff like that. And like you said at the beginning of this thing, though we might have slightly different beliefs, doesn't mean that we can't cooperate with one another and find common ground. Uh, I think is very important and something that I definitely want to encourage to everybody. So, yeah, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. God bless.
Yes, God bless. And thank you, everybody who are listening. And we will see you next week, or at least try, because I'm a procrastinator.
Same.